The time is coming soon when the edges we inhabit will start to redefine the center. Hi everyone, Nisha here. Thank you so much for coming back to the channel. I'm so excited that you're here. What a phrase, right? So the idea of edge walking is from nature writer Terry Tempest Williams. And I first came across this entire idea just a few days ago. A lot of people may know about Terry Tempest Williams. I think I've heard of her before. But so this is a newsletter that I've been getting daily for at least 6 years, if not more. And the newsletter is from the Center for Action and Contemplation, which was founded by Father Richard Rohr, who is a Franciscan monk, so of the Catholic contemplative lineage. And the newsletter was written by Victoria Loorz, who is the co-founder of Church of the Wild. And the Center for Action and Contemplation it's really interesting because I first heard about Richard Rohr in rehab, and he's like a prolific, communicator. And not only has he founded the center in New Mexico, but he found the Living School, and he does of course, his entire lifetime is just all kind of, for lack of a better word, philanthropic or charity work. And, I first heard about him again when I was in rehab, and he wrote a book called Breathing Underwater, which is his version or a more contemplative, mystical version of the 12 steps. And it's fantastic. And there's actually at least one YouTube video on him giving a lecture on it, which is so good. There might be more now. But just in general, he's written Everything Belongs, Immortal Diamond, a variety of things. So I've actually been to a couple of their annual conferences in 2016 and 2017. And it's really funny because I noticed when I went in 2016, I just went on my own because I wanted to go, and, so there was a lot of, there's probably at least maybe 1,000 people, and it was very a homogenous population, nothing wrong with it, but it looked kind of older, definitely older, white, and so it was really funny because in the mornings you can go wait in line and go visit with Richard Rohr. And so when it was my turn, I went up to him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you're Hindu," and he was like, "We have one other Hindu here, let me introduce you to her." And I was like, how do you even know, okay, there's 1,000 people here, but that's cool. And so I ended up meeting her, and she's the Swami Caucasian English lady from England. And we ended up really hitting it off, and she became a good friend of mine, and we kept in contact for years after that. So, and I really respect what he has to say also, just because in that conference, or maybe it was the following year, one of his main speakers was an excommunicated priest who is homosexual, who talked about scapegoating. And it was the first time that I've heard scapegoating described in a lyrical pain, but not kind of stuck in that pain. And it was so interesting and so good. And there was also a woman who, she's Black, lesbian, and she's a Buddhist monk, but I think it was of the Japanese Zen tradition. And, just having dialogue, when you have a captive audience of more conservative people, these are folks that he had as speakers, and that he highlighted in a way that the audience who were exposed to ideas and people that they normally probably wouldn't choose to be, which I really, really liked. So yeah, I don't agree with everything that he says or does, but I respect that how he does talk about things for the most part, in my in my perspective, is very loving and can really transcend any sort of box that you might put yourself into. So that being said, Victoria Loorz writes in this newsletter, perhaps you're an edgewalker too. We occupy a thin space by definition and are a bit lonely. Most people inhabit the vast spaces on both sides of the edges. But those called to the thresholds, the edges between, live in this thin space and recognize one another when we meet. And I totally agree with that. And I actually used to really not like having that soul recognition with other people when I recognized that edgewalker characteristic within other people. And this was like before rehab, and because like I think that for some of us, not everybody, but for some of us on this path, it can be lonely, it can be painful. And especially if you're in the dark night of the soul, you kind of, all you really want to do is like belong. You don't want to like have to do the things that you have to do, which is like probably retreat and go get help and learn about yourself and really open yourself up in ways that you've never done before, and that people like your friends, your family never had to either. And you have to like accept things about yourself. And it's like an unpeeling that feels like a skin graft than it does like like having fun and going on a roller coaster or something. It can be painful. So, but yeah, I would say like along the way, I met people that just kind of had that quality about them. And, on the edges, there are people who are just like everywhere else in the world, I guess, like, different parts of their own healing and their own life story. And it's really cool because I came across people that I just never expected I would come across. And I had these synchronicities, and I had kind of what felt like very, I don't want to say like mystical moments, but points in time where I felt like if I didn't have those things along the way, there's no way I would have gotten into recovery at all. So about 3 years previous to going to rehab, there's about 3 or 4 instances where someone met me on that path and had experiences that I was going through, and that just weren't very common experiences. And that really helped put the seeds in my mind of, okay, I think I need to open myself up to a kind of healing that people in my community may not know how to do. They love me very much, and but I was like really circling the drain. And at this point, I just really had to trust the gods and the people that were being placed on my path. She goes on to say the edges between biosystems are called ecotones. So edgewalking, it has a very ecological side to it. These thresholds usually contain the most biodiversity and therefore are most resilient. And yeah, I totally agree with that as well. I think that like when you're kind of forced outside of your community and your family of origin, or whatever it is that you've been used to for 20-something years, and there's a point where you're in your dark night of the soul, and really the only people that can help you are the people that have been through it before and are on the other side of it, so to speak, or people who have been professionally trained. When you're in your community or in your family, it's really, no matter how they want to help you, how much they want to help you, or how much they love you, no matter how messed up it is or whatever it is, it's really, they can't help you with things that they don't know about, aren't trained on, or else they would have. So it's like you have to totally put your next steps, your healing, if you want to get better, into the hands of people who know what they're doing. And a lot of times they don't look like you, they don't come from the same background, they may not speak the same way. And it can be like, in a lot of ways, very jarring, but that's exactly, it was like fish out of water syndrome. I needed to be plucked out and put somewhere that challenged every single notion I had about what life was and what was right for me, what wasn't right for me, you know, and in a place where I could also hear, because again, when you're in your community and your, you know, the people you grew up with, you kind of like, everyone kind of gets into their roles. You don't really hear what other people are saying a lot of times. You know, it can get, it just, everybody settles into a certain role, right? So I think that the resilience comes in when you are in this new environment, like rehab, like a state Texas ran rehab, and you are on your own. You become aware, but in a way that's befitting of you. So not aware in a way where you're like, oh no, like if I do this, you know, someone gonna be, am I gonna like hurt someone's feelings? If I do this, am I gonna not meet expectations on this side? It was all about learning about who you are and learning about recovery and what it is, and finally going to therapy and group therapy and grief group and opening yourself up in ways that you were kind of like you kind of had to do, or else that circling of the drain was going to continue. And so the skills that I gained was just trusting myself more in these instances, which is, you know, kind of ironic, because as I was just like, I don't know what's going on, and I really need to listen to people who know what they're doing. And so the skill, because it was also very chaotic in rehab, right? So it's like people were leaving all the time. And I knew at that point, no one had to tell me. It was something that I knew innately. Like, I know what I have. I need to stay. Like, I've got to stay through the chaos, because what I'm learning about myself, I'm never going to get this opportunity again. And so I think that idea of resilience and skill building and ways that you build on the edge is different than what you build in community. I'm not saying that people in community or people who are better at belonging don't have resilience or don't have challenges. I'm saying that, you know, there are certain skills that you learn. Just by being on the edge, you are forced to learn certain skills. It's not really a choice. She goes on to say, the time is coming soon when the edges we inhabit will start to redefine the center. But we cannot behave as silos. The more diverse our relationships are, the more resiliently we can hold our own individual edges. People on the edges of their community get along better with other edge walkers of different backgrounds than with people firmly in the center of their own faiths. Very, very true. I think that this isn't a new idea, the idea of like edge walking or walking that path. You know, I think like, at least for me, I would call it like, you know, I would always call it like being an outsider, or I don't belong, or, you know, like those all kind of have like negative connotations. So that's why I was so excited when I saw this term. I was like, it kind of sounds like cool, but it kind of like, you know, it describes the prickliness of the path, but also the earnestness of it. And so I know it's not a new idea, but I think it's just like, I feel like now, just in the last like 5 or 10 years, it's like the edges, those of us walking these paths, the outsiders, it's like it's becoming more mainstream, right? Like it's becoming more porous. And I really like how she says, so the rate at which porousness and the edge walkers, the innovators, the people who normally don't belong, the rate at which it is becoming a lot more mainstream is like quickening. It's just happening a lot more fast, I think. So, and I really like how she says that we cannot behave as silos, those of us that are on this path. And the more diverse our relationships are, the more resiliently we can hold to our edges, you know, and that's very true, because I think, like, you know, even in 12-step, like 12-step meetings, it's like full of edge walkers, and it's the most diverse group of people, no matter what 12-step group or meeting you go into, right? It's like you'll meet people of all ages. Like, it's like the great democratizer. And that is this sentiment in action. It's people who are edge walkers who refuse to stay in their silos, because if you do stay in your silos, a lot of times you're not as effective as you can be. You're kind of enforcing this idea of, oh, I have to be like lonely and it's always going to be tinged with misery, and you only grow to a certain extent. Whereas if you're around other people and you're sharing ideas and you have that commonality with someone else, you are able, like, your healing stays a little more intact, and you kind of validate your own experience by hearing other people validate their own. And you're not necessarily giving up anything about who you are. In fact, you're kind of solidifying it more and more, but like in a good way. And I also think that it kind of, like, you know, as edge walkers or as outsiders or, you know, things like that, it's like it kind of gets rid of that kind of idea of like, oh, you know, like it's kind of cool to be on the outside, and, you know, it's like kind of a badge of honor, but usually like in a negative way. And it kind of like demolishes that kind of false egoic idea of like people looking at themselves like separate than. So then she says, people on the edges of their community get along better with other edge walkers of different backgrounds than with people firmly in the center of their own faiths. And that's so true. And I find that to be true across the board. Like, I am Hindu, but I have studied, and I'm not a big fan of the word seeker, but I would say, like, during rehab, like actually a couple of years before rehab and into, I would say about maybe 4 years ago, like I was definitely, you know, on that seeker path. And that's just also my nature. I love learning about different things. It's like my love of like self-growth, self-development, but, you know, like wisdom in any form. And I found that not only, actually not within, firmly within the center of my community, I found a lot of wisdom and everything there that I grew up with, but usually I also found it outside on the edges and the mystical traditions and contemplative traditions and wisdom traditions of those that were different than my my own traditions. So what's the purpose of my bringing all this stuff in? I don't know. I think it just really struck me when I saw this article, and so I really just wanted to get on here and talk about it. And honestly, I pulled an oracle card the other day, and it was like shining through was the oracle card. And I remember when I was in rehab, I was like, I am gonna live from the inside out. Like, I am no longer going to wear the expectations and the words and the voices of other people in my life. And I think as edge walkers, you have to, in order to like survive, you have to live from the inside out. It's kind of a prerequisite. It's kind of how you're built if you're an edge walker. And so you living from the inside out means that you're kind of releasing all the binds of any system or any person or any teaching. And I feel way more human when I live this way. And it validates my firm belief that we're all full of limitless power and possibility. And so that's why I brought it to the channel, and I hope y'all are having a good day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.